In his book, Propaganda and the Formation of Men's Attitudes, philosopher and sociologist Jacques Ellul defined propaganda as a set of methods employed by an organized group that wants to bring about the active or passive participation in its actions of a mass of individuals psychologically unified through psychological manipulations and incorporated in an organization. So this is a translation from French, and it is a little bit awkward. Basically what Ellul is saying is that propaganda is an attempt by an organized group in order to get others to kind of conform with that group's goals, to either think or act as a member of that group. Notice that he's not really making any kind of moral judgment on propaganda. He's not really saying propaganda is inherently good or bad. Edward Bernays, an early expert in the fields of public relations and propaganda, argued that propaganda was a truly neutral tool, that it was only as good or bad as the ends it was being used towards. It's also not about lying or telling the truth. Of course, propaganda can be a complete fabrication, but it can also be the truth. Sometimes the best propaganda are statistical facts that are presented in a certain context or even with no context at all. It's strictly about the intent. Propaganda is about making you think or act a certain way. If the propagandist can't outright get you to join in whatever organization he's representing, then at the very least he wants you to behave in a way that will be beneficial to that organization. Put in the simplest possible terms, if it's put out by some kind of organization and it's meant to manipulate you in some way, then it's by definition propaganda. Advertisements are a great example of a form of propaganda that a lot of the time goes unrecognized. It's an advertiser trying to manipulate you into buying whatever they're selling. Not everyone thinks of that as propaganda, but that's exactly what it is. For most of history, the state has enjoyed a monopoly on propaganda. Individual actors simply didn't have the credibility or the resources to compete with government propaganda. In more recent times, with the invention of mass communication such as radio and television, the monopoly on propaganda has become more of a duopoly, with private organizations now being able to effectively put out propaganda in the form of advertising. In even more recent times, I think, is where things really start to get interesting with the advent of the internet, and particularly the anonymous mass communication that can come with it. You see almost a democratization of propaganda. Now the barrier to entry for propaganda has been substantially lowered, and what you see is that even decentralized groups of loosely affiliated people online can make propaganda that effectively counters state propaganda. And that trend is effectively what raised my interest in propaganda in the first place. It's the theme I want to explore on this channel, is how the internet has affected propaganda and put us into what I think is unprecedented ground. Propaganda has never been more widespread than it is today, but it's also on a more level playing field than it ever has been before.